Hello and welcome to Leading Sales, the only interview-based podcast where we discuss the challenges and experiences of two of the most critical disciplines in business today, leadership and sales. Our podcast brings together industry experts, thought leaders, and authors to share insights, strategies, and real-life stories to inspire and educate our listeners on the art, science, and the dynamics of leadership and sales. And now, your host, George Gallas Sr.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Leading Sales, the podcast where we explore the art and science of leadership and sales and the mindset behind meaningful success. My intuition tells me that today we're going to have a very interesting episode because our special guest brings a completely different lens to sales, leadership, and decision-making. Sunil Godse is an intuition expert, entrepreneur, and author of several books, including his latest one, Build Trust, Become the Brand. Over the course of his career, Sunil has built multiple ventures generating over $20 million in revenue and has collaborated with major organizations including Citibank, SAP, and Western Digital. He has since taken that experience and built the intuitive branding process, a 5-step framework that has helped over 200 entrepreneurs unlock more than $500 million in growth by teaching them how to trust the signals they were already receiving. Sunil proposes that the biggest missed opportunities and the most expensive mistakes in business do not come from the lack of data. They come from ignoring the intuitive signals that were present all along, even before the data ever confirmed them. Well, Sunil, I'm sure our audience is eager to learn how intuition shows up in sales conversations, or how to distinguish a genuine signal from fear or simple noise, and how leaders in general can make faster and better decisions in high-stake environments. Welcome to the program, Sunil.
Thank you, George. I'm really excited to be here and happy to talk about intuition and the intersection of that and sales.
Sounds good. Yeah. The podcast is all about sales. It's all about leadership and leadership in sales. So perfect topic. And as I said at the beginning, my intuition tells me that this is going to be a very fun, interesting episode. So Sunil, why don't we start from the beginning? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'll start with sort of the transition to where I got involved with intuition. And for those who don't know my background, I'm an East Indian national. And so when you grow up in an East Indian family, they give you the world in terms of a career, as long as it's doctor, lawyer, engineer. And that's also the only 3 paths that they give you. I picked door number 3, and that was engineering. And so I became an engineer, and soon, very, very soon after, I just absolutely knew there was something telling me that this was not for me. But I continued down the path just because of societal rules. And 3 years in, I decided to quit. My dad never spoke to me for about 12 years after that. But the very first thing I got afterwards was, we were talking earlier about an entrepreneurial gene, but I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. My very first opportunity was bringing up a Mexican restaurant chain called Senior Frogs to Canada. We were the first ones to bring it. And I was thrown this thing called branding. So I got all my savings. I got into this great restaurant, and then they say, Sunil, you do branding. And at that time, I had no clue what the heck branding was. But at the same time, I had a mentor who was really influential, and he took me under his wing, and he told me, what's branding? And so I asked him what branding was, and he said, look, branding is very, very simple. When you take care of your customers and your employees, they will come to your brand. And then that's how business tends to grow. So everything I did in that first startup was about taking care of the employees and customers. And we ended up branding, specifically my branding piece. I was able to add $400,000 to about $2.5 million base. We got to $4 million in the next year. And then I ended up starting to consult as a lot more people found out what I was doing. Ended up getting an MBA. And right after my MBA, I went right back to entrepreneurship and the system that I use in terms of using intuition, which is a huge part of branding, because a brand is how it shows up psychologically or subconsciously in the minds of your employees and your customers. And that is where your intuition lives. And so when I combine intuition with branding and you're really using intuition for decision making, that's when your employees want to stay. That's when your customers want to continue to buy from you because they trust your brand. And intuition is really, really influential in developing that trust. And so I ended up developing a model after looking at the science behind it, because I'm an engineer after all. And so when I dove into the research, it was very clear that it's subconscious in nature. It acts in 33 milliseconds. So that's how quickly your intuition works. And so when you take it to a branding perspective, or we were talking earlier about leadership and sales, to get that buy-in, it's really 33 milliseconds. And that's when someone trusts you or not. And so when I developed an intuitive branding system where you take a look at this intuition when you make decisions, that affects your brand. And then in 2006, right after my MBA, 2004, I ended up using that in a healthcare company. And we took that company basically from 1.5 million to 6 million in year one and to 20 million in year two. And it ended up being sixth fastest growing company in Canada. So here I now have this thing called intuition, which drove the business. And as every entrepreneur wants to know, where are the numbers? How does this lead to metrics? And so that was sort of the proof there that intuition really does drive results and takes businesses to the next level. And since then, I've been doing intuitive branding since it's been over 22 years now.
So an eclectic career for sure. And so you've done corporate life, and then you were an entrepreneur before that, and then you couldn't help it, but you had to go back to entrepreneurial life, and you studied this concept of intuition. But many people, including myself, think that we're born with it, but we don't recognize it or we don't use it well. So can you share with us, how can we recognize intuition? Because as kids, we always use it unknowingly. We just jump from here to there because we think it's right. And we take big risks when riding a bike or when jumping from a wall or whatever stupid thing we're doing. But our intuition tells us that we are safe. But as we grow older, then we get invaded by noise and we become fearful of taking action and taking steps. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How are we born with it, or how do we develop it?
Yeah, so you're absolutely born with intuition. And when I dove into the research, it showed there was one article that showed that babies as young as 2 months old were shown to have intuitive tendencies through some of the exercises that they took them through. But what intuition really comes down to is pattern matching. And so when you look at the decisions that you make on a day-to-day basis, there's these signals that your intuition sends you. And it's usually tied to what we call the RAS, the reticular activating system in your brain. And there's these signals that tell you that this is the right way to go, or the right decision to make, or this is the wrong way to go, or the wrong decision to make. And that's based on patterns. So when you're very young, obviously there's not a lot of experience there. But every single time you do something, you're going to get feedback. And that feedback gets pushed into the subconscious part of your brain, which is where your library is of data points your intuition draws upon. And so as you continue to go about life, it sends you these signals. And this is where failure is also very, very important, because as you fail, I think this is where the biggest lessons are, because when you fail in whatever area of your life, that also gets tucked into the library that intuition pulls from. And so your intuition is going to make sure that you never do that again. And so when you come up to a decision, there's going to be two types of signals that your intuition sends you based on your past patterns. It's going to send you a positive signal, which is this is the right way to go, or a negative signal, which is sort of more bothersome, to say that's the wrong route. Maybe you need to pause and rethink that. It doesn't mean you can't go down that route. You just have to pause and solve whatever problem that your intuition has. And the problem that happens, it's the same problem that I faced when I went into engineering, is that we allow other people's opinions, societal rules to come in, our own fears and perhaps ego to affect our decisions. And then we start
it's almost like we're looking decisions. It's almost like we're looking for excuses not to follow our intuition, right?
Absolutely. You know, when I was in high school and looking at my career, I was telling my dad, I want to go into business or into computers. I really love those two. And because of his pressure on me saying, go into medicine, or go into engineering because he was an engineer. And I fell for that. And that was a very emotional decision because of my connection. But I absolutely knew that was not the decision that I needed to make for my career. And that was a very strong signal. I've interviewed a monk that believes that, your reincarnation does move intuition into the next life. And there's a study that was done that looked at mice. And what they did with these mice is that they shocked this mice when it smelt a particular flower. And so what they did is that these mice ended up having offspring. And the offspring, even though there was no shocking of these mice, when the offspring approached these flowers, they also felt a jolt. So if that is a bit of an analogy that your genes carry intuition in the next generation. And again, it all depends upon what you believe. And so my belief is that, yes, that the intuition does get carried to the next life.
Interesting concept that intuition gets passed through generations. Now, let's talk to our salespeople in the audience. In sales, and I've been in sales for many years in my career, leading sales teams and also in corporate leadership. So I remember many times where I was facing a dilemma, being in the discovery phase or in the negotiation phase or in closing. And my intuition was telling me to follow one path. But then companies, right? Companies are always data-driven and they get sick of the amount of data they collect. And then the data points in one direction, but my gut is telling me to follow a different direction. And then we all end up following the data and then we fail. So can you tell us more about that and how our sales people, sales leaders in the audience can follow intuition to improve their business success?
Right. And so when you're looking at sales, you really want to understand how does a customer actually make a purchase? You can have all the data in the world, but we all have intuition and so do your customers. So as a salesperson, what you really need to do is you need to speak to the intuition of your customers. And again, as I told you before, the research shows that in 33 milliseconds, we're evaluating that right away. And within 100 to 150 milliseconds, we typically know which decision that we want to make. And when you look at the way that the neurons work and the chemicals in our brain works, that translates to about a minimum of 6 seconds to make a decision. That's how quick it is.
That's where the saying of you only have one opportunity to create a very good first impression, it comes from there. It's amazing, and I really like the parallel that you draw between intuition, building trust, and then sales. Because I always give the example of we need to renovate our kitchen in the house, and we don't know anybody, so we research and invite 3 different vendors to evaluate and give us a quote. They walk around, they make notes, and they present 3 proposals. But then who do we pick? Do we pick the cheapest one, the most expensive one, or the one that we trust that they're not going to make a mess in the kitchen? And 9 out of 10, most people will pick the one that they trust. And the trust comes from those milliseconds that you alluded to. Those or the 6 seconds that it will take us for our gut to tell us, I don't know what it is, but I trust these people better. And what you're describing is basically our lizard brain is the one that makes these quick decisions, and they are emotional decisions. The buying process at the end of the day is an emotional decision. And you and I are engineers, and we know that we can resist it, we can help it, but we need to justify those buying decisions. We can go to the, I forget what it's called in Canada, the electronic store, the most famous one, Best Buy is down here in the US, Best Buy. So you go buy whatever toy you wanted to buy, and you need to get home with a justification, right? So you start thinking, okay, I need to justify it this way. And let's face it, I can't remember if you're married or not, but my wife used to be famous for doing this impulsive, emotional purchasing at the mall or whatever, and comes home with prefabricated reasons why this was the best decision in her life, right? So, and again, this is living proof that what you and I are talking about is real. And then let's take it to the business side of things. And for the salespeople in the audience, many are in quick sales environment, like as you alluded to, car selling or store selling. But let's go to the engineering world, where you go into multi-month, sometimes years, selling cycles and selection processes, tendering processes, where with the scoring system, where the best score wins and price doesn't necessarily win. So it's a very complex world. However, I have come to realize that even in those tough environments, the decisions are still emotional. The buying team makes an emotional decision, and then they find a way to justify it through data. So I was reading one of your earlier books. How many books have you published, by the way?
I'm now in my third.
So can you tell us the titles of each one?
Absolutely. So the first one was Fail Fast, Succeed Faster. And this is about learning from failure. And if you learn from the instances of failure you've had, you don't repeat them, you'll be able to succeed faster. That led to my second book called Gut, which is that many of those people who did succeed faster, ended up trusting their intuition to really kind of scale. And so that's when I dove into the science of what intuition really was, because I had really had to understand, what is this thing called intuition? And then the intuitive branding one, which just got released a couple of months ago, is my third book on the process and how you can use intuition in things like leadership, hiring, in your operations, marketing, and sales. And that's how you really kind of scale. So how do you have trust in those different elements after the first step, which is learning how your intuition works, because there's 4 types of intuition.
Exactly. I was reading your first book and I came across the 4 types of intuition. And until that point, I didn't know that they existed. So can you tell us about those 4 types of intuition?
Absolutely, yeah. So the first one is called experiential intuition, and that's based on your past experience. So as I was telling earlier, it's sort of pattern matching. The second one is called relational intuition, and that one is about the people that you see in the room. Do you trust them? What's their body language like? What's their tone? The third one is called situational intuition, and that's about the situation that you're getting into. Is the market right? Do we have the systems in place to get into a business situation? And the last one is creative intuition, and that one is where it takes a look at the risk that you get into and whether the risk is right for you. And I'll summarize all of them in a very, very simple case. A friend of mine named John Rothschild he was an investment banker, and he really wanted to get out and start a business of his own. This fellow was making $3 to $4 million in Toronto as an investment banker and wanted to start at zero. So everybody thought, this guy's cuckoo. But if you look at the 4 types of intuition, he had 25 years as an investment banker, tons of experience. Experiential intuition was great. He knew a lot of great people in the industry. So relational intuition, he had a lot of great team members. He did a lot of benchmarking with businesses. So situational intuition was saying, yeah, you're okay there. And his creative intuition, which was risky, is that he wanted to walk into a tiny bankrupt little restaurant. And so his wife even asked him, like, John, why are you making this decision? I trust you, but why are you taking this bankrupt little restaurant? There's so many other businesses you can pick. And John just said, it feels right. And he said, you can have all the data in the world, but this feels right. And when he walked into that tiny bankrupt little restaurant, that was Eastside Mario's location number 1. And he grew that to over 1,000 locations, $2 billion in total revenues under a bunch of different brand names before he sold it off to Fairfax, all because it felt right. And those are how the 4 types of intuition all work together to help you make the right decision at the right time in whatever situation that you're in.
That's amazing. So you're talking about the human factor and the importance of it, and I fully agree with it. But also you're talking about speed. So intuition enables speed if we use it right. If I am learning correctly, going back to fail fast, succeed faster, we shouldn't take those small failures as devastating elements. We should take them as lessons learned, and we should take them as an opportunity to move on faster with the next step, instead of dying by analysis or by procrastinating on decisions. And then, as you said, the competitors will pass us, or the opportunity to come up with the next best product or newest innovation will pass us because we were sitting on it for too long. So what you're suggesting is use intuition to move fast, take small steps. It's almost like a trial and error, what I'm hearing. Try one. If it doesn't work, move on, next move, but don't give up, because the intuition will guide you in the right way, and then use data to verify your decisions. So, Sunil, can intuition be taught, or is it just natural? And if it can be taught, and I can assume it can be taught because this is your line of business, teaching intuition and intuition in the corporate world, and you advise your customers on it. How can intuition be taught? And is there a specific type of people that are more prone to adopting the intuition practices and others that are not?
So as I mentioned before, you're born with intuition. So we all have intuition. We've developed that intuition, and we all have specific signals that are both positive and negative. These signals are very, very unique to each and every single person. So George, you and I can approach the exact same situation. We can look at the exact same decision that we're about to make. But your intuition, if it says go ahead, could be the dots connecting. For me, that go ahead decision might be a feeling, a flow, or a gentle pull. So we can be in the exact same scenario, but your experiences and my experiences are totally different. So one of the first things I do in the intuitive branding process, which is actually step one, is to, first of all, educate you on what each of the 4 types of intuition are. And then each one of those types of intuition are going to send you a very specific type of signal, which I teach you how to recognize. And once you label them in a set of worksheets, you now know what your inventory of positive signals are and your negative signals are. So whenever you make a decision, you take a pause and you try and identify what's that signal that's telling me something about that decision. If it's a positive signal, like for you, if it's the dots connecting, then George, you're going to go ahead with that decision again. But for me, if it's, let's say, I lose my peripheral vision and my eyebrows cross, that's one of my negative signals. In that same situation, for me, that same decision is not good for me. So it's about recognizing what those signals are, and that's what I teach. And then once we do that, one of the very first things we do is that we look into the business to say, okay, where did you make emotional decisions where you ignored your intuition? And every single time, they're able to find an ROI in the investment in the intuitive branding process because the numbers tell the story. And so, some of the big wins went from 100,000 to 200,000 to 1.2 million in terms of 2.1 million, in terms of the bad emotional decisions that are made because they ignore their intuitive signals. And yet when they go back, they actually remember, I remember not wanting to make this decision, but they ended up making it because of friends or family or somebody convinced them and they went through and they got hit financially. And so that's what we reverse. Once they understand their intuition, they reverse their mistakes, they put money in the bank account, then they look at their leadership skills, then they look at hiring, then they look at marketing, then they look at sales and how to use intuition in all those different areas. And that's when their business starts to take off.
So in essence, you teach us how to recognize intuition and how to use it in the most positive way. Let's talk about, for example, an executive in the boardroom. And the executive is trying to promote intuition and is facing rejection. And what tools can that executive use to convince the members of the board or the ones attending that meeting that this is a good idea, that we should be listening to intuition, maybe not more than we listen to data, but perhaps as much, or find a way to combine both?
Yeah, so one of the things that when you're looking at using intuition, it not only uses the intuitive part of your brain, but it actually does go to the rational side of your brain to make sure that you're justifying that decision on how you feel about perhaps the numbers or where the systems are or the people that you trust. So there is a set of logic that's already in there that your intuition relies on to say, this is a good decision. So if your intuition says to go in a certain direction, you're making that decision based on where the business is that you know of. What you need to do is just pull all that evidence out and then paint a picture. Because if your intuition's already painted that picture's there. What you need to do is just paint that picture for the other executives to justify them. Because again, intuitions, you can't say my gut just said this. No boards, the board's probably going to fire you. So if you have an intuitive feeling about, let's say, a business opportunity you want to get into, then justify it. So very much like that CEO that wanted to go into security consulting, my gut said no, he was going emotional. And the reason why my gut said no, I can't just say my gut says no. I had to show them that his marketing wasn't on par. I had to show them that he needed relationship selling. I had to show them that he had a 0.4% renewal rate. So there's pieces of evidence that I showed to say this is not a good decision to make.
Okay, so we need to learn and train ourselves on not rejecting intuition, but accepting it, opening the door to it, listening to it, and then digging deeper into those intuitive signals to recognize the good ones and then embracing them and going forward with them. For those that know me well, they know, or for those that are following my podcast, they know that I'm big on culture and building culture and transforming culture. And if I want to create an environment that is prone to intuition, that invites intuition, so that every single contributor feels comfortable with offering their intuitive ideas, what would you say is the right way of going about it so that we can slowly, I'm sure it's a process, but we can slowly build an environment that invites intuition?
Yeah, so the first thing is you have to make sure that you have that environment that exists. So there are a lot of executives say, this is a great opportunity here. We respect your voice. Feel free to give your opinion. Yet when somebody does that, an employee does that, they're criticized and they're put down. So what you say has to be what actually exists. So once you create that environment of openness, then an employee is more likely to actually open his or her mouth and share a really, really good opinion. The other thing is to make sure that there's some psychological safety, and then also to teach them to, if they're going to come up with a suggestion, make sure that they back that suggestion up. And so the reasons why, because there's going to be a lot of emotional decisions. Well, you should do this and you should do that. But then how do you back that up? So when it's a really informed decision, again, you're using your intuition, you're painting that picture, then you have informed decisions coming ahead. And that's how, in a very, very short way, creating culture that's very intuitive. And so one of the other things is to make sure that you have a set of values, you have a mission and a vision statement that they can really latch onto. So if you have a journey that they love, then they're going to latch onto your journey and they're going to keep wanting to support you as employees or as customers. I mean, you look at Apple, if you look at the employees, Steve Jobs had an interview where he said, people loved working at Apple for Apple, not because they were getting paid and all that stuff. He was a really harsh man in terms of the way he led, but people stayed and they got the best of themselves at Apple and they loved that. Customers, I'm an Apple customer as well. I love what they put out, right? And so they haven't gotten me out of that ecosystem or my family. There's a couple of examples of what happens when you truly want the employees to, be happy in their roles, speak up, they listen to their employees, the customers have an amazing experience. That's when you can have sort of that culture that comes in. Again, this is a very, very short way of doing it. When we go into the intuitive branding process, it's much more expanded, but you really have to, again, walk the talk, make sure you have a psychological safe environment. Make sure you hire the right people that are in line with your mission, vision, your core values. And there's a really good recipe there that when they offer intuitive decisions, embrace them as long as they're thought out and researched well enough.
And talking about hiring, for those people managers in the audience, when we interview candidates, no matter how many pages the resume has, and no matter how many accolades, and no matter how many diplomas and certifications and years of experience the candidate may have, we almost always tend to follow our intuition when we make the hiring decision. And we created the concept of the panel interview, right? We make the candidate go from interview to interview to interview to interview, so we gain consensus. That's our way of validating our own intuition. And if somebody's voting from another candidate, we try to convince them that our candidate is the right choice because we want consensus, because we have fear of being blamed for the wrong decision. But at the same time, hiring an employee is one thing, and intuition plays a big part in that exercise, but also qualifying sales opportunities. Sales teams, they work on sales opportunity pipelines, and then they need to qualify the good ones from the others. And many times data is not abundant. Data is not readily available to make a well-informed decision. And somebody may offer intuitive reasons why pursuing this opportunity is better than this other one, because I don't believe that we have any chances on that one, so let's focus on this one instead. We cannot win them all, so we may as well be selected. But there's a struggle in that room, right? Some people want hard evidence and data to prove why you think that we're going to win option A and why you think that we should drop option B. Prove it to me. So intuition must play a significant role in that room as well, right?
Absolutely. And so This is where if you're looking at senior leaders making a decision, and George, if you're in that position, you feel that you're not going to win a particular type of contract. Don't forget, you've got a couple of decades of experience in there. And so you've had contracts that won and you had contracts that lost. There are ones that won surprisingly and there are ones that lost surprisingly. But remember, all that has put it into the back of your brain, right in the limbic system as experience and intuition, sort of pattern matching. So when you've seen something like that pattern come up again, you can confidently say, I really don't think we're going to win this. In some cases, you might, in that moment, not be able to explain it, but your intuition has seen that pattern before and has informed you to say, yeah, there's a higher likelihood that this is not going to win because of that pattern that happened in the past. And that's where you have to really trust your intuition, because it is using data. It's using billions and billions of data that you've amassed, and going through the different other people, they also have data as well. So where's the data come as a consensus, or almost as a democratic society where all the data is sort of voting for themselves without making an emotional decision? And again, when it comes to hiring, sometimes you want to hire someone that looks like you or laughs at your jokes or talks very superficial, and you need someone. So you're willing to forego some of the details that you need at a project. That these are where some of the emotional decisions come in when it comes to hiring that you really have to be careful about, and that you're really looking at this thing from a very objective perspective, and that person is really right for the outcomes of the role that he or she is going to be in. And that's where intuition really comes in, because if it notices a pattern that deviates from what you really need, it's going to warn you right away. And it's up to you to recognize that signal to say, this is not the right candidate. But if you think emotionally and say, well, we need someone because we need someone next week, this person is available, you're taking a gamble, and you might as well be in Vegas rolling some dice.
That's right. Hey, I think I was right at the beginning when I said that my intuition told me that this was going to be a very interesting conversation. So, Sunil, let's get our audience an opportunity to get to know you better at a personal level. What do you do when you're not working 60 hours a week?
So I have two daughters, and so one's in university and the other one's in high school. The older one's now looking at health sciences, and the young one, she's finding herself with her friends and stuff, and two different personalities. And so there's always sort of those personal elements, getting together with friends. I love a bit of traveling, so we try and go camping whenever we can. But yeah, it's just really kind of managing them. And we're at a stage now where they don't want to see dad or mom, so drop us off maybe a block away, or don't come to the front door, just wait in the car. So I'm in that sort of process of managing their time. And because they're quite independent, now I'm able to take more care of myself by going to the gym. That allowed me to write my third book and, to take care of the clients in the tuna branding process. We're in the expansion mode with my company now. So there's a bit of hiring going on and bringing on some other business coaches and things like that. So I'm doing some interviews there. But doing that. And at some point, hopefully, I had a love for flying when I was really, really young. So at some point, maybe look at getting my private pilot's license and seeing where that goes.
Okay, Sunil, interesting. So now let's go back to signals for a moment. We talked about them earlier in the interview, but how important are signals, and how should we go about identifying them and listening to them?
So as I said earlier, we all have these signals, and we know when your intuition is kind of talking us into something or out of something, because when people go through the history and they say, I absolutely knew I shouldn't have made that decision. So there's a fellow named Vin Jiang. He's a very big communication speaker now, used to be a magician. And back in 2016, he was on 80 stages around the world talking to 100,000 people, showing them about communication. And professionally, he was on top of the world, but he said his intuition was telling him something was wrong. And what was happening is that his life was really kind of falling apart. So he went off to a place where there's no cell signals. And what he realized is that he was living his life for everyone else. And he never worried about what he wanted out of life. And his intuition kept telling him, what do you want? What do you want? So he came back and he knew what his intuitive signals were. And he decided to ignore those and went back to the same life again. A very superficial, transactional relationships, big brands, driving the Mercedes and living in downtown LA. And his intuitive signals got stronger and stronger. And it wasn't until his mom came over from Australia to say, "This is not my boy," and she said, "When you're around squid, you're going to get ink on you." And that's exactly what was happening to him. So he decided to go back to Australia, leave all the big brands, leave all his superficial, the pretentious friends, and his business actually took off. So when you don't listen to the signals, you actually get deeper into bad situations, personally and professionally. But when you listen to the signals, sometimes we feel fearful of going in a direction. We were talking about that a little bit earlier. So there's a fellow by the name of David Dame. He was in Mexico on a beach, and he actually has cerebral palsy. So he's been in a wheelchair all his life. But just once he wanted to go into the water. His intuition kept saying, go into the water, go into the water. But his fear of drowning and falling headfirst into the water overcame him. So he never did. And one time, his intuitive signals got so strong, he says, I'm going to do it. So he had his handlers take him up to the beach, right to the water, stand him up. And for the first time in his life, he had the sea water going through his toes, and he loved it. And then his fear came true. He went headfirst into the water. But listening to his intuitive signals, he actually heard this saying, get up and just take another step forward, and just take another step forward. And that's what he did. He kept moving forward 1 foot by 1 foot, listening to those signals. And then by the time the water got up to his neck, he stopped and he turned around, and he just was shocked at how far he came. So when you listen to the signals that your intuition is telling you, you'll be shocked at how far you can take your business or your life. You just have to trust the signals and move forward and stop looking back.
That's a wonderful story. And I was reflecting on your first example. We all go on vacation, and as we are relaxing and detoxing from our jobs, we start dreaming about what if. That's our own intuition talking to us, because we disconnect, right? Our cell phone may have signal, but we disconnect from the day-to-day life, and we start listening to the signals that are all the time they're there, but we just don't have time to listen to them. So in the silence of those moments away on vacation, we start hearing them. And then we start having these eureka moments and these big ideas. 99% of us never pursue them, right?
Absolutely.
I think the invitation is to all our listeners to get your material, get your books, so they can start learning on how to listen to their own intuition, both in personal life and in business. And speaking of that, Sunil, who are your customers? How can they find you? What do you offer to them? Who do you normally work with?
So typically I work with entrepreneurs where their businesses are about $1 million or more. They'll typically have a team or about to have a team, and they're in a wide range of industries. I've been in retail, wholesale, roofing, healthcare, online sales, security consulting, all over the map. So what I do is I enable the intuition of the entrepreneur. They apply it in their businesses, and that's how they're able to scale. And so there's a couple of ways to, if that's something you want to do, you can always get in touch with me to do that. I also have an intuition scorecard, and George, I'll send you the link to that. And what that does is in 60 seconds or less, it's going to tell you which of the 4 types of intuition is your strongest, but more importantly, which is the weakest, because the weakest type of intuition is a signal that you're missing. And then within that scorecard, I give you some tips on how to strengthen that type of intuition, and then with opportunities for us to go to help you work through that if you'd like, and that's something your intuition has to say. If this is an intuitive decision to have me help your company move ahead, it makes sense. But otherwise, there's lots of content I'm going to be putting out on YouTube, my socials, all on intuition in terms of hiring, on decision making. And as long as you consume that content, you'll learn a lot about yourself and the best way to grow your business and your brand using intuition.
Great. I'm going to drop a link to your website when we publish this conversation. And Sunil, I was right. My gut told me this is going to be fun. This is going to be a very interesting, enriching conversation. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Any last words for our audience?
No, George, I think you summed it up very, very nicely just recently. When you take a step back and you allow yourself to listen to the signals that your intuition is sending you, and you get those intuitive thoughts, you're going to get those eureka moments, and that's the time to really kind of plan things. Stop getting to the day-to-day, getting too busy because those signals get lost. But when you take your step back, as you said, get those eureka moments. That's what you got to plan. Plan those eureka moments. Use the 4 types of intuition. Use your signals and chart that path. Because then you can start taking that one step into the ocean or the sea, another step and another step. And using your intuition, you're going to be shocked as how far you came. And that's my only advice, is to trust the signals your intuition is giving you.
Beautiful. Thank you very much again, Sunil. It's good having you in the show. And for the audience, feel free to follow Sunil. I'm going to drop the link at the bottom of the page. Thank you so much,
George.
Sunil.
I really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. Take care.
And that's a wrap. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode of Leading Sales. Please make sure to subscribe to our podcast in your favorite platform. And don't forget to visit our page, leadingsales-podcast.com, for more resources on the art, science, and the dynamics between leadership and sales. Until our next episode.